The first snowflake landed on my windshield as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, December 23rd, and I was already regretting this trip. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband, Julian. "You don't have to do this. We can turn around right now." I stared at the colonial-style house, draped in white lights, with the oversized wreath on the front door, a perfect picture of holiday cheer. From the outside, it looked like the kind of home where families gathered to make gingerbread houses and sing carols by the fireplace. I knew better. "I'm already here," I texted back. "Might as well get it over with." It had been 3 years since I'd spent Christmas with my family, 3 years since I'd sat at that dining room table, trying to make myself small enough to fit into their idea of who I should be, 3 years since my mother had looked at me with that peculiar blend of disappointment and dismissal that made me feel like I was still 12 years old, desperate for a crumb of approval. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother, Diane, stood there in a cashmere sweater set, her hair perfectly styled, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Samantha," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "You're late." I glanced at my watch. I was 5 minutes early. "Traffic was heavy," I said, slipping off my coat. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, the scent triggering memories I'd rather forget. Christmas music played softly from the living room speakers. My father, Robert, appeared in the hallway, a glass of scotch already in his hand, despite it being only 2 p.m. He gave me a brief nod, the kind you'd give a distant acquaintance, not your daughter. "Your brother's already here," he said, as if that explained everything. Of course Tyler was already here. Tyler, who lived 20 minutes away, who never missed a family gathering, who had somehow managed to remain the golden child well into his 30s, despite a string of failed business ventures and mounting debt I was only recently learning about. I followed them into the living room where Tyler sat on the leather sofa, his wife Melissa beside him, their twin boys playing with expensive toys on the carpet. At 8 years old, the boys looked like miniature versions of Tyler, all dark hair and confident smiles. "Sam," Tyler said, not bothering to stand. "Long time." 3 years, I replied, settling into the armchair farthest from everyone else. Melissa smiled at me, one of those tight, uncomfortable smiles that said she'd rather be anywhere else. I couldn't blame her. These gatherings had a way of draining the joy out of any room. My mother disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a tray of cookies arranged in perfect concentric circles. She set them on the coffee table with the care of someone staging a photo shoot. "So," my father said, lowering himself into his favorite recliner, "I suppose you're wondering why we asked you to come home for Christmas." I hadn't been wondering, actually. When my mother called 2 weeks ago, her voice syrupy with forced warmth, saying how much they'd missed me and how important it was for family to be together during the holidays, I knew something was wrong. My family didn't do sentimentality. They did transactions. "I assumed you'd tell me when you were ready," I said. Tyler shifted on the sofa, and I caught something in his expression, a flicker of discomfort that made my stomach tighten. "We wanted to talk to you about something important," my mother began, settling onto the sofa beside Tyler. She reached over and patted his knee, a gesture of comfort that sent a clear message about whose side she was on. "A family matter." I waited, my hands folded in my lap, feeling suddenly like I was back in high school, sitting in the principal's office, waiting to hear what I'd done wrong this time. "Tyler's been going through a difficult period," my father said, swirling the scotch in his glass. "The economy, you know. His consulting firm has hit some rough patches." I glanced at Tyler, who was staring at the Christmas tree in the corner, his jaw tight. Melissa had her hand on his arm, a silent show of support.
"I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. Whatever our history, I didn't wish failure on anyone. "The thing is," my mother continued, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to ask for something, We've been helping them as much as we can. Your father's retirement fund, our savings, but it's not enough." The room fell silent, except for the twin boys, who were now arguing quietly over one of the toys. Outside, snow had begun to fall in earnest, coating the perfectly manicured lawn in white. "We saw your Instagram post," Tyler said suddenly, finally looking at me. "The kitchen renovation. Must have cost, what, 50,000?" My breath caught. The kitchen renovation. Julian and I had saved for 2 years to completely redo our outdated kitchen. It wasn't about showing off. It was about finally having a space that felt like ours, where we could host friends for dinner parties, where I could bake without fighting with cabinets that wouldn't close properly. I'd posted a single photo, proud of what we'd accomplished, never imagining it would become ammunition. "Something like that," I said carefully. "So you have money," my father said. It wasn't a question. "Julian and I both work," I replied, feeling heat creep up my neck. "We save, we plan." "Family helps family," my mother continued, leaning forward. "That's what we do. When one of us is struggling, the others step up." I looked around the room, at these people who shared my DNA but felt like strangers. I thought about my wedding, 4 years ago, when they'd called the morning of to say they couldn't make it. Tyler had a work event, they had explained. An important client dinner. They'd try to make it, but no promises. They never showed up. I'd walked down that aisle alone, Julian's family filling the seats on both sides, trying their best to make me feel less abandoned. His mother had held my hands before the ceremony, tears in her eyes telling me I was part of their family now. I'd cried then. Not tears of joy, but tears of grief for the family I'd never had. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tyler and my father exchanged glances. My mother smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. $75,000, Tyler said, to cover the mortgage payments, the boys' school tuition, keep us afloat until the business recovers. $75,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. That was more than my annual salary at the nonprofit where I worked, more than Julian and I had in our savings, more than we'd spent on our entire wedding, which they never attended. "I don't have that kind of money," I said. "But you could get it," my mother pressed. "You have that house. You could take out a home equity loan, or ask Julian's family. They seem well off." The audacity of it stole my breath. They wanted me to go into debt, to ask my in-laws for money, to sacrifice my financial security for a brother who'd never once called to check on me, for parents who'd missed every important moment of my adult life. Where were you at my graduation? The question came out before I could stop it. My mother blinked. "What?" "My college graduation. Where were you?" "Samantha," my father said, his voice carrying a warning. "This isn't the time." "You said you had to help Tyler move into his new apartment," I continued, the memories flooding back with painful clarity. "You said you'd try to make it to the ceremony, but you never showed up. I stood there, in my cap and gown, watching families take photos together, and I was alone." "We supported you through college," my mother said defensively. "We paid for your education." "You paid the bare minimum after financial aid," I corrected. "I graduated with honors, and you weren't there to see it." Tyler stood up abruptly. "This is exactly like you, Sam, always making everything about yourself. We're talking about a real crisis here, and you're dredging up ancient history." "Ancient history?" I stood too, my heart pounding. "You want to talk about history? How about my wedding, the most important day of my life, and not one of you showed up?" "We explained that," my mother said, her voice rising. "Tyler had a work obligation." "And what about you and Dad? What was your excuse?" Silence. The twins had stopped playing, their wide eyes darting between the adults. Melissa looked like she wanted to sink into the sofa cushions. "We're a family," my father said finally. "Families forgive. They move past these things." "No," I said, feeling something crack open inside me, something that had been sealed shut for years. "Families show up. They celebrate each other. They don't just appear when they need something." I grabbed my coat from the hall closet, my hands shaking as I shoved my arms through the sleeves. "If you walk out that door," my mother said, her voice cold, "don't expect to be welcomed back." I paused at the threshold, looking back at them one last time. Tyler stood behind the sofa, his face red with anger. My father hadn't moved from his recliner, hadn't even set down his scotch. My mother stood in the archway between the living room and the hall, her arms crossed, her expression hard. "I stopped expecting anything from you a long time ago," I said. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I walked through the falling snow to my car, feeling lighter than I had in years. Julian called before I'd even left the neighborhood. "How bad was it?" he asked. "They wanted $75,000, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "For Tyler's mortgage and the boys' tuition." Julian was quiet for a moment. "And you said—" "I said no, and then I left." "Good," he said simply. "Come home. I'm making hot chocolate." I drove through the snowy streets, past houses lit up with Christmas lights, past families building snowmen in their front yards. The radio played carols, songs about coming home for the holidays, about family gatherings and joy. I turned it off. When I pulled into our driveway, Julian was waiting on the front porch, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in his hands. He'd strung lights along the railing, simple white ones that glowed warmly against the darkening sky. Our house was small, a modest 2-bedroom we'd bought 3 years ago, but it was ours. Every corner held memories of laughter, of late-night conversations, of building a life together. "Hey," he said as I climbed the porch steps. "Hey," I replied, taking the mug he offered. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. "I'm proud of you," Julian said quietly. I leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his arm around my shoulders. "I should have done it years ago." "You did it when you were ready." Inside, the house smelled like sugar cookies. Julian had been baking, something he did when he was nervous or worried. The kitchen, our beautiful renovated kitchen with its white subway tiles and butcher block counters, was covered in cooling racks filled with stars and trees and snowmen. "You've been busy," I said, setting down my mug. "Stress baking," he admitted. "I made enough cookies to feed a small army." I picked up a snowman, still warm, and took a bite. "These are perfect." We spent the evening in our pajamas, frosting cookies and watching Christmas movies, the kind of simple, peaceful evening my childhood home had never provided. Julian didn't press me for details about the visit. He knew I'd talk when I was ready. It wasn't until we were cleaning up, loading the dishwasher and wiping down counters, that my phone buzzed with a text. Then another, then another. "Tyler, you're being selfish." My mother, "We raised you better than this." My father, "Family means sacrifice. You've forgotten that." I stared at the messages, feeling the familiar guilt trying to worm its way back in. But something had shifted. Standing in that living room, finally saying the things I'd been holding back for years, I'd felt something break free. Not just anger, but clarity. "They're not going to stop," Julian said gently, reading over my shoulder. "I know. What do you want to do?" I thought about it for a long moment, watching the snow continue to fall outside our kitchen window. I thought about all the Christmases I'd spent trying to earn their love, all the times I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less of a burden, all the times I'd convinced myself that if I just tried harder, if I just gave more, they'd finally see me. "I want to block their numbers," I said. Julian nodded. Okay. And I want to spend Christmas with people who actually want me there. We can do that, he said, pulling me into a hug. My parents have been begging us to come. My sister keeps texting, asking if we're bringing your famous cranberry bread. I laughed, feeling tears prick my eyes. I forgot about the cranberry bread. We have 3 days, Julian said, kissing the top of my head. Plenty of time to bake. That night, curled up in bed with Julian's arms around me, I blocked my family's numbers one by one. Each tap of my finger felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for 30 years. My phone was finally silent. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, the sound of snow falling against the windows, the only noise in our quiet, peaceful home. I didn't know it then, but that decision, that moment of choosing myself, would change everything. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop participating in your own diminishment. Sometimes the only way to find your family is to stop pretending you already have one. Christmas morning would bring new traditions, chosen family, and the beginning of understanding that love isn't something you earn. It's something freely given, or it's not love at all. Christmas morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through our bedroom window. Julian was already awake, propped up on his elbow, watching me with a soft smile. "Merry Christmas," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Merry Christmas," I replied, feeling a peace I hadn't expected. No anxiety about disappointing my parents, no dread about navigating Tyler's passive-aggressive comments, just quiet, simple happiness. We spent the morning at Julian's parents' house, a cozy ranch-style home that always smelled like coffee and vanilla. His mother, Grace, pulled me into a tight hug the moment we walked through the door. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, and I knew she meant it, not because she needed something from me, but because she genuinely wanted my presence. Julian's sister, Sophie, was already in the kitchen with her wife, Amy, chopping vegetables for dinner. Their daughter, 4-year-old Emma, ran up to me with a drawing she'd made, a wonky Christmas tree covered in glitter. "I made this for you, Aunt Samantha," she announced proudly. I knelt to her level, accepting the drawing like the treasure it was. "This is the most beautiful tree I've ever seen. Can I hang it on my fridge?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, then grabbed my hand to show me the presents under the tree. As I let her pull me along, I caught Julian's eye. He was watching us with that expression he got sometimes, the one that said he saw me, really saw me, and loved what he saw. The day unfolded in easy warmth. We played board games, ate too much food, and laughed until our sides hurt. Grace asked about my work at the nonprofit, actually listening as I described the youth mentorship program I'd been developing. Julian's father, Thomas, wanted to know if I'd started that blog about sustainable living I'd mentioned months ago. Sophie showed me photos from her recent gallery opening, asking for my honest feedback on her new photography series. No one asked how much money I made, no one compared me to anyone else, no one made me feel like I needed to prove my worth. It wasn't until we were driving home that evening, full of ham and pie and genuine affection, that I checked my email. I'd left my phone in the car all day, not wanting to risk any interruptions. 17 emails, all from family members I'd blocked on my phone. My Aunt Linda had sent a long message about the importance of forgiveness during the Christmas season. My cousin Derek, whom I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, wrote to tell me how disappointed he was in my behavior. Even my grandmother had weighed in, her message brief but cutting. "You were always the difficult one." But it was my mother's email that made my hand shake. The subject line read, "You've left us no choice. Samantha, since you refused to help your brother in his time of need, we've been forced to take drastic measures. Your father and I have taken out a second mortgage on our home to cover Tyler's expenses. This means we'll have to work several more years before retirement. We're in our 60s, Samantha. We should be enjoying our golden years. But instead, we're sacrificing because you won't do your part. Everyone in the family knows what you've done, how you turned your back on us when we needed you most. How do you put your own comfort above your family's welfare?
We hope you can live with that. Don't bother coming around when you finally realize what you've lost. Mother. I read it 3 times, each pass bringing a different emotion. First, guilt, the old familiar weight of it pressing on my chest. Then, anger, hot and bright. Finally, something else, something that felt almost like relief. They took out a second mortgage, I said, handing Julian my phone. He read the email, his jaw tightening. They're trying to manipulate you. I know. And I did know. I could see it clearly now, the pattern that had played out my entire life. They'd made a choice, they'd deal with the consequences, and then they'd find a way to make it my fault, to make me responsible for their decisions. What do you want to do? Julian asked. I thought about it as we pulled into our driveway, the Christmas lights we'd hung twinkling in the darkness. I want to create something good from this, something that matters. Over the next few days, as the year wound down toward New Year's, an idea began to take shape. I couldn't stop thinking about all the young women I worked with at the nonprofit, girls who reminded me of my younger self. Smart, creative, full of potential, but lacking the support and resources to fully realize their dreams. What if I could give them what I'd never had? Not just money, but genuine belief, actual support, someone in their corner. On New Year's Eve, while Julian and I sat on our couch with champagne and leftover Christmas cookies, I told him my plan. I want to create a scholarship fund, I said, for young women pursuing creative careers, art, writing, music, anything that gets dismissed as impractical. Julian set down his glass, his eyes lighting up. That's brilliant! I have about $40,000 in savings, I continued, the numbers clicking into place in my mind. I was thinking we could use half to seed the fund, $20,000 to start. Then I could do fundraising, get donations, build it up over time. Use all of it, Julian said. I blinked. What? Use all $40,000. I'll pick up extra shifts at the hospital. We'll rebuild our savings. But this, Sam, this is important. This is the kind of thing that changes lives. I felt tears prick my eyes. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, he said, taking my hands, except marrying you. We clinked our glasses together, toasting the new year and new possibilities. Outside, fireworks began to explode across the city sky, bursts of color against the darkness. The next week, I threw myself into research. I consulted with lawyers about setting up a nonprofit. I reached out to my contacts in the arts community. I drafted mission statements and application criteria. Julian helped me set up a website. Nothing fancy, but clean and professional. We called it the Visibility Project, because that's what it was about, making visible the girls who'd been overlooked, dismissed, told their dreams weren't practical or valuable. I chose not to make it about me, about my story. Instead, I focused on the mission, supporting young women whose talents deserved recognition and whose potential deserved investment. The scholarship would cover tuition, supplies, and mentorship. Recipients would get paired with women in their chosen fields who could guide them, encourage them, and open doors. Everything I'd wished for when I was younger.
In mid-January, I sent out the announcement to my network. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Former colleagues donated. Friends shared the website. Julian's family contributed. Within a week, we'd raised an additional $15,000. That's when my mother found out. I was at work when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. $55,000! My mother's voice came through, sharp with fury. You had $55,000 and you gave it to strangers instead of your own family? My stomach dropped. How did you... Your cousin Jenna saw the website. She thought we'd be so proud. Her laugh was bitter.
proud that our daughter values random girls over her own flesh and blood? I took a deep breath, stepping into an empty conference room. Those random girls are young women who need support, who need someone to believe in them. And your brother doesn't need support? My mother demanded. Your father and I don't need support? We're going to be paying off this mortgage until we're 70, Samantha. We'll probably have to sell the house. That was your choice, I said quietly. You chose to take out that mortgage. You chose to keep funding Tyler's lifestyle instead of letting him face consequences. Those were your decisions. He's your brother. He's a grown man who's never had to stand on his own 2 feet because you've always caught him before he could fall. And I'm done being punished for his failures. There was a long silence. Then, if this is really how you feel, don't expect anything from us. When we're gone, when the will is read, don't come crying about being left out. I won't. I don't want your money, Mom. I never did. I just wanted you to show up, to see me, to care about my life the way you care about Tyler's. We always cared. No, you didn't. You missed my graduation. You missed my wedding. You've missed my entire adult life because you were too busy propping up Tyler. And now you're angry because I'm not doing the same thing. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "You'll regret this." Maybe, but I'll regret it a lot less than I'd regret betraying myself one more time. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in that conference room for a long time, staring at my phone. Then I opened my email and started drafting the scholarship application. The deadline would be March 1st. Recipients would be announced in May. We'd award the first scholarships in time for the fall semester. By February, the Visibility Project had gained real traction. A local news station did a story about it. The article was shared thousands of times on social media. Donations poured in from people who'd seen themselves in the mission statement, who understood what it meant to be overlooked. Applications arrived from all over the state. I read each one during my lunch breaks, after work, on weekends. Girls who wanted to study painting, creative writing, music production, theater. Girls whose parents had told them to be practical, to choose careers that made money. Girls who felt invisible in their own families. One application in particular stopped me cold. Her name was Isabella, 17 years old, from a small town 2 hours north. She wanted to study photography, but her family thought it was a waste of time. They'd told her she should go into nursing or teaching, something sensible. Her essay was raw and honest, describing how she felt like a ghost in her own home, how her camera was the only thing that made her feel seen. I showed the application to Julian that evening. I said, "This could have been me." He read it carefully, then looked up with tears in his eyes. "Then you know exactly what she needs." In March, my phone rang again, another unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Samantha?" It was Tyler's voice, but different, softer, almost uncertain. "Don't hang up, please." I waited, my finger hovering over the end call button.
"I saw the scholarship fund," he continued. "The news story. I wanted to say something. If you're calling to yell at me, I'm not. I'm calling to apologize." The words hung between us. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. "I've been thinking a lot," Tyler said. "About the wedding. About graduation. About, well, everything. You were right. About all of it." "Tyler, let me finish," he said. "Please, I've been in therapy. Melissa insisted after we had to pull the boys out of private school, and my therapist asked me something that kind of broke me. She asked when was the last time I did something without Mom and Dad's money, and I couldn't answer. I'm 34 years old, and I couldn't answer." I heard him take a shaky breath.
I've been angry at you for having boundaries, for building something on your own, for not enabling me the way they do. But the truth is, I'm jealous. You escaped. You built a real life, and I'm still here, still dependent, still playing the role of the golden child, even though we all know I'm anything but golden. What are you saying? I asked quietly. I'm saying you were right to say no. And I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to choose between your integrity and your family. That's not a choice anyone should have to make. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Thank you for saying that. I don't expect us to be close, Tyler said. I know I've burned that bridge, but I wanted you to know that what you're doing, the scholarship fund, is really good, Sam. Mom and Dad will never admit it, but it's better than anything our family has ever done. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, processing. Forgiveness wasn't something that happened all at once. It was a door left slightly ajar, not an invitation back in, but an acknowledgement that people could change, could grow, could recognize their mistakes. I didn't know if Tyler and I would ever be close, but knowing he could see me, really see me, was enough for now. In May, we announced the first recipients of the Visibility Project scholarships, 5 young women, including Isabella. I met each of them at a small ceremony we hosted at a local gallery. Their faces glowed with hope and gratitude and the knowledge that someone believed in them. Isabella brought her camera and took photos throughout the evening. At the end, she showed me one she'd taken of me and Julian, standing together, looking at each other and laughing about something. We looked happy. We looked whole. This one's my favorite, Isabella said. You can see the love. I hugged her tight. This girl I'd just met who felt like family in a way my blood relatives never had. That evening, Julian and I drove home through the spring night, windows down, music playing softly. Our savings account was nearly empty. We'd have to postpone the bathroom renovation we'd planned, but we'd helped 5 girls pursue their dreams, and we'd plant the seeds for hundreds more. Do you regret it? Julian asked, reaching over to take my hand. I thought about my mother's emails still sitting unread in my inbox. I thought about my father's silence, Tyler's apology, the family I'd walked away from. I thought about Grace's warm hugs, Sophie's genuine friendship, and the scholarship recipients' shining faces. No, I said, I don't regret a single thing. Because here's what I'd learned. Family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. Family is about showing up. It's about seeing people clearly and loving them anyway. It's about building something together, not tearing each other down. I'd spent 30 years trying to earn love from people who saw me as a supporting character in someone else's story. Now I was writing my own story, surrounded by people who celebrated each word. As we pulled into our driveway, I saw our little house with its modest lights, its renovated kitchen visible through the window, and I felt a surge of gratitude so strong it took my breath away. This was home, not the house I grew up in, but this place Julian and I had built together, this life we'd chosen. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. Thank you for seeing me.
I typed back, thank you for letting me. Julian wrapped his arm around my waist as we walked up to our front door. Inside, everything was exactly as we'd left it, imperfect and beautiful and ours. That Christmas, I'd chosen myself, and in doing so, I'd found something better than the approval I'd spent years chasing. I'd found peace, purpose, and a family that I'd chosen, who'd chosen me right back. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is permission to walk away from people who can't see your worth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop diminishing yourself to make others comfortable. I'd finally learned that lesson, and I'd never been happier.